Okay, so today I am actually going to do a video in defense of the Byronic hero slash Boys Over Flowers Meteor Garden. So if you're not familiar with Boys Over Flowers or Meteor Garden or its original Japanese title, Hana Yori Dango, here goes. Hana Yori Dango is a shoujo manga by Yoko Kamio. Shoujo, meaning young women, is manga that is specifically aimed at teenage girls. Ta-da! So the manga was published between 1992 and 2004, and ever since then, it's been on a roll in terms of adaptations. There was the first live-action film in 1995, which is terrible. It's available on YouTube for anyone who wants to watch it. There was also a successful anime series in 1996. And then, at last, the first official Media Garden adaptation. This was from Taiwan between 2001 and 2002. Not a total Betty, but a vast improvement on everything that came before. The more serious takes, Japan 2005, 2007, and 2008. So there was season 1 in Japan in 2005, then season 2, Hana Yori Dango Return in 2007, and then there was a film to wrap the series up in 2008. And then came the South Korean version in 2009, arguably my favorite one. It is my favorite one. Then there was the Chinese version in 2018, which is the first ever version I actually watched. And it's a bit long. Both the Korean and the Chinese versions are on Netflix, although I do believe the Korean version will be leaving Netflix as of May 1st. Finally, and I say finally, but what I mean is finally for now, there is F4 Thailand. So there is, as of this year, a Thai version that just wrapped up a few weeks ago. So, Boys Over Flower, the gift that keeps giving. There are so many versions of this that it can go on forever. I won't be surprised if I find out next year there is another version, maybe a Filipino version, a Vietnamese version. And I'm actually surprised that the West hasn't remade this as of yet. But really, I've been rewatching all the versions of the series for the past few weeks, and I have some thoughts. I've been looking at what other people have been saying about the series, and I naturally expect criticism because some scenes in all the versions are very hard to watch. So there's been a criticism mainly of the male lead in the series, but before I get into that, just let me give you a quick overview of what the series is about. It's a loose retelling of all these classic, mainly gothic romance stories. Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Rebecca, Wuthering Heights, and the story centers on this headstrong working class young woman who enters into this prestigious school where she faces off or gets into conflict with the four most beautiful boys in school. They're beautiful, they're wealthy, they're arrogant. Well, the main lead is arrogant. One way or the next, she stands up to them, chiefly the main male lead, Domyoji, Dominsa, or Junpyo, or Time. Her name is either Tsukushi, Shanzai, Jandai, or Goria, which loosely translates to weed or wild weed, which is in contrast to the boys who are dubbed F4, the F standing for flowers. She gets into a love triangle with the main lead and the sensitive musician. Depending on the version, he's either called Rui, Lei, Jihu, or Ren. The three of them are in this love triangle for the rest of the series, with all other kinds of shenanigan. So this is a typical story. See again Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, or Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester. Same idea. Poor working class, headstrong young woman butt heads with a mysterious, brooding man, wealthy man. And I've seen criticism of this series, namely the main male lead, chiefly that he's not a good person, which is actually true. In this climate, the general consensus is that he's toxic. I remember years ago there was the debate about Twilight, had Edward Cullen, who was modeled on Heathcliff, another Byronic hero in Wuthering Heights, was a very toxic character, and that this should not be promoted to young girls. It's not that I don't think there's a point to be made. It's simply that I'm often concerned that we give so little of the benefit of the doubt to young women that they don't know what this is. And I just wanted to say in defense of this character, first let me explain what this character is, because many people don't seem to understand this is a classic romantic hero hero character. He is a Byronic hero. For those who don't know what a Byronic hero is, a Byronic hero is a classic hero of English literature, chiefly Gothic fiction. The best known example is perhaps Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. So the Byronic hero is actually defined by Lord Byron, who is a 19th century poet and author, best known for his Harold Pilgrimage poems. Lord Byron himself was often described as exhibiting these traits: mysterious, wealthy, beautiful, strong personality. Lord Byron, he was actually described by one former lover as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. This is basically the Byronic hero in a nutshell. Lord Byron later went on to write many of these characters in the Harold Pilgrimage poems, but also in Don Juan is another perfect example of this. But this is who the Byronic hero was based on. So first I will say I've included Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice in my definition of a Byronic hero because while he doesn't quite fit the Byronic hero, he has the same personality type. You know, Pride and Prejudice is not exactly a Gothic fiction novel, but Mr. Darcy has the same brooding arrogance, beauty, wealth, intellect, and self-alienation and isolation and reclusiveness of the typical Byronic hero, minus the deep, dark secret. No wife in his attic, no dead wife whose body he hid type of situation. So that said, the Byronic hero is a classic literary archetype. If he's in a horror fiction, like a vampire fiction, see Dracula, he's a villain, but you take him out of that story and put him in a romance, he is suddenly a romantic hero. Byronic heroes are often characterized by having, several traits. They may be angry, rebellious, seductive, mysterious, brooding, struggling with vices. Usually they have high intelligence and emotional awareness, which tends to make them brood and be outsiders from society. They have a strong disdain for society, often are viewed as condescending, and often, have an air of superiority. Byronic heroes are not actually confined to the 1800s, but that's mainly where they come from. The modern bad boy, for example, is often viewed as a kind of new age Byronic hero due to his outsider mentality, his anti-hero stance, and his general penchant for just being broody and moody and hating everyone and the world altogether. Now, this is not exactly a defense of these characters. I understand that there are many, many problems with them. I mean, Heathcliff is technically, I always say he went from being a romantic hero to a villain, to a Gothic villain in Wuthering Heights. And of course, Mr. Rochester had his mentally ill wife locked away in his attic, and Max de Winter of Rebecca, he killed his wife. So these characters are not exactly good guys, so to speak. They're defining characteristic is usually that they often get a redemption story arc, and often that redemption comes in the form of a headstrong young woman. In the case of Boys Over Flower, whichever version you choose, she's Shanzai, Jandai, Goria, or Tsukushi. What I wanted to say about the females that he interacts with is, if the general criticism is that it sends the wrong message to young women that they can change the bad boy, that the bad boy should be forgiven for his bad behavior, his aggression, his violence. And in the Boys Over Flowers franchise, he is very violent. It's debatable which version has the most violence. Either way, he's always very, very violent. Just he takes his anger out on different people. I have seen the analysis of the latest iteration of the series, F4 Thailand, that it's the first version in which he acknowledges that he has a problem. He has impulse control problem, anger management issues, and he acknowledges that for the first time, whereas in the other versions, his behavior is often dismissed as immature. That has never sat well with me. His violence, his bullying, often to the point of forcing people to commit suicide, is typically dismissed as just immature. He also has a mother and older sister, both of whom are domineering, and often they greet him with violence. We see this in all versions, and in the Japanese version was the only version where he actually associated Sakushi's assault of him because in all the versions she fights back physically. He associates that with treatment he receives from his mother and sister, which leads him to becoming obsessed with. This was never really analyzed in any kind of depth. In all the version, he's dominated by his mother and his sister, and often he feels pressure to be ruthless. The only version that truly explores this is the Thai version, where this is explicitly discussed that his mother expects him to be a certain way. She expects him to be ruthless towards everybody. He's angry at the world despite having the world at his fingertips. Our main female lead is the only one who actually stands up to him. And this is important. If the argument is that the message to young girls is you should tolerate these guys, I don't think that's necessarily honest, because the young women in these stories never tolerate these men. In fact, they stand up to them and let it be known that they will not allow themselves to be bullied and to be pushovers. You might recall, again, Elizabeth Bennet standing up to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy's incredibly condescending proposal to Elizabeth Bennet is met with Elizabeth Bennet's, strong response of goodbye. The assumption there is because she's poor, working class, and plain, she's supposed to be grateful that he wants to marry her, and she just wasn't having it. And we see the same thing in Boys Over Flowers, where after he determined, okay, fine, I can't bully you, but I can make you my girlfriend, and he dresses her up on his terms and brings her into his world and expects her to accept his offer of a relationship on his terms. The selling of himself is, well, I am good looking, I'm handsome, I am rich, why wouldn't you want me to be your boyfriend? And she just wasn't having it, and she tells him pointedly that you cannot buy everything you want. And this is a concept that he doesn't understand. He's used to tossing money at people and having people give him whatever he wants. And here is something he wants that he simply cannot have and cannot buy. So the young women in these stories are headstrong. They do stand up to them. And the important thing is these young women never actually change for these guys. They don't change for these characters. It's the other way around. These men are the ones who get off their high horses, come down from their Gothic mansion and castles, and learn to open up and to be better people. You can argue perhaps that it's the woman's presence that forces them to do this, but at the same time, this is not a story where the young homely girl is so grateful for this man's attention. She fights it all the way, especially when he tries to give it on his term. He's the one who has to prove himself, who has to open up, who has to become a better person in order to be accepted by this young woman that he wants. She doesn't accept him for what he is, that this violent, broken, rude, mean-spirited person. He has to prove to her throughout the series that he can be a decent person, that he wants to change. There is a lovely scene in Boys Over Flower, they've kept it for all the versions I've seen, where he demands that she shows up for a date, and she shows up but a few hours late because she is busy living her life and she won't live her life on his terms. And when she shows up hours later, he is standing there in either the rain or the snow, and he's been waiting for her for hours, and he tells her, this is the first time I've ever had to wait for anyone. And this is a very telling scene because he's never had to wait on anyone, much less against the elements. And here he is waiting for her after 2, 3, 4 hours. In the case of, the Korean version, he's been waiting there for 4 hours in the snow just for her to show up for this date that she was too busy hanging out with her family to even remember. This to me is like very indicative of everything that's right about this character, or rather these young women. They are not living their lives on the terms of these men. These men are the ones who must change to accommodate them. And we see that throughout Boys Over Flowers, where in all the versions he feels this is where he can reach her. She never just accepts his wealth and his privilege and never just goes into that world. Again, I just wanted to point that out, that yes, I don't condone a lot of what these Byronic hero types do, especially in these Boys Over Flowers series. the violence, the aggression. Someone also pointed out in one of the critiques that I've seen that she never agreed to be his girlfriend. And this is true. It was mainly him courting her on his terms, dragging her around, kidnapping her, that kind of thing. But she always pushes back. And it's true that she never agreed to be his girlfriend. But this is why I particularly like the second half of the series, when he is taken away, or rather he goes to handle his family business, and they have technically broken up because he has responsibilities. In this second half, she is the one who starts pursuing him. So even though she never agreed to be his girlfriend in the first half, by the time we get to the second half, she is the one pursuing him, implying that she's come around, and so it's not simply him bullying her into a relationship. She actually wants to be in this relationship. I've seen someone actually compare this to the Stockholm Syndrome, but I think that's a little bit harsh. This is fiction. This is not meant to be that serious, which is the other thing I wanted to point out. This is not meant to be that serious. Yes, he uses his wealth to kind of stalk her, show up to places, and basically always kind of pushes her in his direction, or finds a way to be where she is. But ultimately, she always pushed back against him, and she never allowed him to get away with it. And eventually, we see that once he did leave, she is the one who started saying, you know, I do want to be with him. I want to be with him, and I will pursue him. And this is you know, a reversal of the first half of the series. Here she is again being active, and I like that she is actively saying, I want to be in this relationship. I want to be with him. So I don't think it's fair to compare it to a Stockholm Syndrome, or even the defense that, and you should always stand up to these types. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them walk all over you. Don't live for them. Don't change to be in their world. Always be you, because in these stories, this is the common pairing. Mr. Darcy fell for Elizabeth because she stood up to him. She was headstrong, and she refused to let him bully her and intimidate her and condescend to her. Jane Eyre, Mr. Rochester, same idea. So if there's anything young women should take away, it's that you should never let these bad boys walk all over you. But anyway, that was my take in defense of the Byronic hero in Boys Over Flowers and general. Please just give young women the benefit of the doubt that they know who these characters are, and that they understand this is not real life. They're going to take away anything from this is to, let's be headstrong. I know some people will be like, but how did Bella Swan stand up to Edward Cullen? Technically she didn't, but the thing with these bad boys is it's a psychological mind game. And remember that Edward was initially attracted to Bella because he couldn't get into her head. He couldn't get into her head and therefore couldn't manipulate her. So in a sense, it's a supernatural take on the headstrong young woman whose head is so strong that you cannot get into her thoughts. Oh, I think that was just my computer acting up. But anyway, that's my take on the Byronic hero. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this and whether you've seen Boys Over Flowers, any of the versions, and what your thoughts are overall on the Byronic hero. By the way, I should mention that my character, Devon, in my Winter Haven novels is actually a Byronic hero, although at the time I wrote him, I had no idea what that phrase meant. So I was just writing a classic hero. I was definitely reading English lit at that time. So that might be why, because this is a staple character in classic English novels. But anyway, that's my take on it.